Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you the resources that I'm using in order to put together our ancient Roman history main lesson block. Now we've done this unit before, and if you want to see how we put together that previous unit, you can tap on the screen right now. That link is also at the end of this video as well as in the description box below. Now we're going to approach this unit a little bit different than the previous one in that this time around we are going to be following our curriculum a little bit more closely, although we still have a number of additional resources that we're going to use. I'm using the 6th grade curriculum by Live Education. This is a main lesson book that a teacher will use as the resource material as well as inspiration in order to create her lessons. So I'm going to be using this, but of course I have a whole lot more books and activities and projects here. Now the first thing I do when trying to put together either a unit study or a main lesson block is that I need to start collecting some resources. One of my favorite places to look for resources is Rainbow Resource, although that is changing because lately I haven't been super pleased with their selections. But in general, I'll head over there, and I really love their search engine. They have a ton of really great material, and I'll just plug in the unit that we're doing, whether it's ancient Rome or ancient Egypt or a botany unit or a physics unit, and then you'll get pages and pages of different products that you can choose from. What I like about their selection is that it is geared towards homeschoolers and teachers versus going to, say, a really broad retailer where you're going to get all kinds of materials that may not be suitable for children and students. All right, so then I kind of narrow down my search and I start looking for things specifically that I have on my personal list of things that I want to add to our unit studies. So in general, especially if it's a history unit, I'm going to look for a book that has an actual history. Biographies and autobiographies are also really great to add to any unit. We're really enjoying the You Wouldn't Want to Be series, and whenever we find one that complements one of our units, we will add it into our unit, as well as the Who Was series. Those ones are great for biographies. I think that they're really simply and well written, and we end up learning a lot from those books. Other books that I'll look for are activity books or kits that we can do activities with. So hands-on projects are really big with our units. And with a history unit, I really look for a book on cooking or culture with recipes. That way we can also have some fun in the kitchen. So today I'm going to show you the resources that we're using. So let's start with the Live Education curriculum. This is for 6th grade, so anywhere between ages 10 to 12 this would work for. And this works really well after you've covered Roman mythology and Greek mythology. And so this would be mostly the history. And I really like the teaching methodology for this particular unit that is, I feel it's a little bit different from about 5th and 6th grade on. It's a little bit different than the teaching method from the previous years. Now, I admit that it's taking a little bit of practice to get it down, and really we haven't done it all that successfully. But the way that it changes in the teaching is that instead of presenting the entire lesson in a really imaginative way, the lesson is actually presented in 2 ways. The first way is to do a very short, somewhat dry but historical lesson first, just to lay down the foundations and get some information about that particular situation or in that time period. The following lesson will be one that then in some ways brings life to the story and can bring some embellishment to the story, and that way you are now kind of meeting the imagination of the student after you've laid down the foundation for that particular lesson. So the lessons run on a 3-day cycle approximately, where you're starting out with the information. The following day, you'll revisit that information in a more imaginative way. And by the 3rd day, maybe even the 4th day, you're doing your written narration and maybe a drawing to go along with it. Now, this has been especially challenging to follow that as wonderfully and as perfectly as I would like, simply because as a homeschooling family, things happen, and sometimes we're reading a lot from one of our resource books, and then we're drawing a lot, and we just kind of have to plug in our lessons where they fit. So sometimes we'll start with the drawing, or sometimes we'll start with the reading, or sometimes I will start with one of these wonderful books that my son can read on his own, just to kind of whet the appetite and just kind of get us in gear for this particular main lesson block. Since we've been homeschooling for about 14 years, we have a lot of resources that we can pull from in order to put together our units. But basically, all of these items were in our bookcase, and I pulled them all out. Once they were all laid out, then I could prepare my lessons and do my lesson plans. And so I put together 6 weeks of lesson plans. Now, these lesson plans are available for you if you'd like. And also, I have a separate video on how I actually did the lesson planning for this particular unit. That link is down in the description box below. And if you want these lesson plans, they are on my website at pepperandpine.com at the blog post that goes along with this video, and that link is also in the description box below. So I encourage you to check it out if you would like to have these lesson plans. Currently, some of the areas are left blank so that I can fill them in. And then with the live education curriculum right here, it's going to be too much for me to plan the entire 6 weeks in one go. And so I've left that blank so that I can go either week by week or day by day and add those in, simply because this particular main lesson block isn't quite as user-friendly as some of the other ones, since we need to put together our lessons a little bit more for this particular unit. Okay, so this particular main lesson book is the resource guide that the teacher will use in order to put together the lessons. Now, some of them have information here that you can read and then present to your student, and in other areas, it recommends looking at different resource material in order to build up the lesson. So I want to show you the resource materials that we got for this particular unit, and share with you the ones that I'm reading aloud to my son and the ones that he's going to read on his own. Okay, so before we dive into the resource materials, I want to show you the kits and projects that we have done previously for this unit. Now, I go ahead and I keep the materials in case we want to order these again, or just as a reminder of the things that we actually used for the unit. So the first one I want to show you is this kit on building the Coliseum. So we'll just pull this one down and have it available as classroom decoration and just as inspiration for this unit. We also have some maps that we picked up from Rainbow Resource, and I really like these maps. There are 4 different ones, and they have different focuses, and we'll have these just on our table, like our school table, so that my son can refer to these maps as we are doing these lessons. We also had this kit called Our Amazing Bridges, and we used it specifically for this unit for this particular bridge here. You can also see there are 2 other bridges in here. And again, we'll just pull this one down, and we'll talk about it when we talk about Roman architecture, and that's why we got this kit. We also have a couple of dig, discover, and display kits that we did last time. The Roman vase happened to be really, really challenging, and it was one of our very first dig, discover, and display kits. There's also the Roman bowl, and there's also the sundial. The sundial was really easy to do, and I'd recommend that one over these 2. This one was especially challenging, and I had to help my kids a lot with it. We also have another poster with our DK Eyewitness book, and this one will just hang in our schoolroom as classroom decoration. Okay, so I have all of our materials divided up into 6 different piles for the 6 different weeks. There are some books that are going to go for the entire unit, and I will explain why that is and how we are using those ones. So for the first week, I have probably way more historical fiction for my son to read, in part because these were all super fast, super easy, and he literally read about a book a day. So I scheduled 5 different pretty simple historical fiction for him to do. This one is called The Thieves of Ostia, or Ostia, and this is part of the Roman Mysteries series. We also have the Silver Branch. This happens to be book 2. I didn't realize that. I don't know what book 1 is, but he was asking about it. We also have, this is a new one. This is called Hannibal, Rome's Worst Nightmare. This one has some really nice illustrations in it as well. And then we have another, is this another one? No, this is a different one. This is called Mystery of the Roman Ransom. And then we have See You Later, Gladiator, which was super, super simple. So some of these are really super basic. They're not high quality at all. These 3 were just super basic. And I had them for him because I knew he would want to read something that was a little bit more lighthearted compared to the rest of the books that I'm going to show you for our historical fiction and for other assigned reading. I wanted it to start out with something that was just kind of drew him in, gave him some information, reminded him, I mean, he's done this unit before, so remind him of some of the things that he had learned before. And then this book was super simple, and so this was just a way to kind of ease into the unit in a way. All right, so these 2 books are actually new for this unit. The first one is called Ancient Civilizations of Greece and Rome. So this one actually is a really great book to add math to your unit. It explains like some historical bits, and then it includes some math within these paragraphs, and then it has some questions at the bottom, which I think is great. You wouldn't want to be in Alexander the Great's army. This was supposed to be with our ancient Greece unit, and it was misplaced, and so I decided to add this to the first week of this unit, and that way it kind of bridges those 2 units together. We also have this DK Eyewitness book, and while we're not really using our DK Eyewitness books anymore within our units, in part because I felt like when we were reading them, there wasn't a lot of retention, and then it felt like reading this book as well as like our historical fiction and our history book, I was just doing too much reading. It was taking a lot of time, and we had information overload, and it just didn't seem like the best use of my time if I was reading it and they just weren't really absorbing a lot of information from it. And the reason why is because this book isn't connected from start to finish. And that's actually a really great thing about the DK Eyewitness books. You can open up anywhere to any 2-page spread, and you'll get some information, some extremely beautiful pictures or illustrations, and it will tell you about this particular topic. And that's it. It's not really related to the next page. So if you just needed something on pottery or food or the mythology, you could dive into this book and get information that you needed. Plus, you get these fantastic pictures. But for me, I decided not to have them included in our unit studies with me reading them aloud, but I'll definitely, if I still have them, they'll be available for my kids to look at. And this is one that my son will just pick up and just read through, and it's just an enjoyable book for him to do that with, and that's fine. He'll get something out of it that way. All right, so I want to show you the resource books that I have for this unit that could be used for the entire 6 weeks. We have the early history of Rome, and I generally have a hard time getting through these books just because they're so dense, and I've barely tried to read this one aloud. Not even this one, but there's other ones in the series, because my kids tune out pretty quickly. It's not written in a super lively way, which is fine because this can be used as a resource material for the teacher to put together the lessons. And this is great for all of those details, the people, the dates, the situations, all the stuff that can tend to get a little bit dry. This resource book is fantastic to have all of those in place if you need to check any of that information. However, there is a far better choice if you need a read aloud for the history of Rome. This one's called The Story of the Romans, and this one is a really fantastic, easy read. The chapters are short, so it's not too long to read one chapter, and it's really engaging, and the chapters really blend from one chapter to the next really well. My only complaint about this book is that it was written about 120, 130 years ago, and you can see some of the opinions coming through in the book. And also it's important to be mindful that this is written for a Christian audience. Even though it is not God-centered, you can see some little hints here and there. And so if that's an issue for you, then this may not be the resource book that you're looking for. It's really mild when it comes to the Christian references, but it will basically make a judgment on what the Romans did and then remind the audience that that's a crime, or that's not okay, or that's not the way we do it. And so, for instance, when the Queen Dido killed herself, the sentence reads, "Of course we know such a deed is a crime." So suicide is a crime. But in those days of Queen Dido, people had not learned many things that are now taught even to children. So also this would be talking about the Christian belief, or maybe just a religious belief in general. So I highlight those things because sometimes it's pretty extensive, and I take that opportunity to talk about it with my son, or just as a curiosity, just to kind of highlight them where you can really see author bias coming through in a book. So despite those little issues, I still think this is a really fantastic resource. It is really, really easy to read aloud, and my children really enjoy it. And that's where we had our first problem with my lesson plan. But before I tell you what that problem was, let me show you the other book that we have. This one's called Ancient Rome by Charles Kovacs, and I'm really, really enjoying the books by Charles Kovacs. There are a number of them in this series. We've already done Ancient Greece, Astronomy, and Geology. We really enjoyed those books. Charles Kovacs was a Waldorf teacher in Scotland. He's since passed away, but his notes have been collected and compiled into this book. And it really feels as though you could be a student in his classroom. It's written in a really lovely manner. And also in this book, you can see that the chapters are really short, which means that you're not getting too much information. So it's really easy to add in one chapter per day for your lessons. And I really like the format of this book. So we definitely want to use it. So what I thought we would do, and then this one is the Tale of the Time of Nero, but I don't think we're going to get to this one. You can see how dense it is, and this was a new book, and I actually don't think that we're going to get to it at all. So what I decided to do this time around, because I also have my notes, I did have my notes before. These are my current notes, which are actually scratched, and it's completely different anyway. Before, what I would do is I would look at how many chapters were in a book like this, and then I would figure out how many chapters we needed to read in order to cover the entire book within that unit. And while that is a great way to actually complete the book, I found that it wasn't a great way to approach this book with that's so dense and our particular unit, in part because we were reading so many chapters every day that we just had information overload. And because we were also doing other material, we didn't have an opportunity to write this up as our narration. And so we were reading every day, many chapters a day. By the time that we were done with it, we just could not make sense of the different events and, why one thing led to another, or who the characters were in history at the time. It was just too much. So what I decided to do was just say, we're going to do one chapter a day for these 6 weeks, and however much we get, and that's it. And so I sat down on the first day of our unit and I read one chapter, which was super short. But the chapter was so engaging, and it ends in a way that it just really lends itself into reading the next chapter. So I'm like, well, we'll just read one more chapter. We'll just read one more chapter. And before I knew it, we'd already read 4 chapters in no time. So then I thought, okay, then maybe I'll just end up reading the entire week in one sitting. Then the next day, my children also wanted me to continue with this book. So what I decided to do was read 4 chapters of this book every day for about 3 weeks of the unit. Then we'll put this book aside and we'll read 2 chapters a day of this book, so 10 chapters a week for the next 2 weeks. And then we'll come back and we'll read this for the last week or so. And that way we kind of get a break from the book, unless we really, really like it and we just read this one the entire way through. However, I really, really want to read this book too. So that's kind of the initial plans. Now, these books are going to take us through all 6 weeks, but the other books that I'm showing you are ones that we are going to be doing just for that particular week. However, any book that is like, say, this DK Eyewitness book or this book called Historium, these books are going to be available for my kids to look at the entire time, and hopefully that just keeps us in the motivation for this unit and the spirit of this unit and the inspiration to continue with this unit and just keep going with it. I am really excited about this book. It's called Cooking in World Cultures, Food and Cooking for Ancient Rome. This is the 3rd book like this that we had in this series. We've done Egypt and Greece. I'm really excited to do this one because we have an ancient Roman meal that we did the first time we did this unit, or the first time on this channel that we did this unit. And it was a huge success for my kids. However, we made or took a lot of liberties in making that ancient Roman meal. And so it's nice now that we have this cookbook so that we can do things that are a little bit more authentic. So I'm really excited to get into that book. The books that I have for my son to read. Okay, so this book I will read aloud to them because I also want to know, I want to read this book. So I'm going to read this one aloud. And in this week, we will either get the materials in order to make our ancient Roman meal this week, or we'll read it this week and we'll do our ancient Roman meal the following week. The books that I have assigned for my son to read, we have another one of these Roman mysteries, The Secrets of Vesuvius. This is another super easy book. He can read it in a day. We also have White Isle, and this is a book, a historical fiction that I read aloud to my kids the last time we did this unit. So I'm just going to have my son read it. And then we have Caesar's Gallic Wars, and that's another pretty simple book for him to read. So this week I've got 3 books for him to read rather than the 5 that he had the previous week. And then in addition to that, we also have these 3 different books on Pompeii. Now there's 2 ways to approach this. You could read all 3 of them in 1 week and really do like a little mini focus within the 6 weeks on Pompeii. Or if you've got multiple resources, you can spread them out. I could have just chosen one for this week and the following week done another one. And that way we could have spread out the information over the 6 weeks rather than concentrating them into 1 week. I think either would work fine. It just kind of depends on what you're feeling like. So we have The Secrets of Pompeii. This is a super simple, really easy book to read. You could find something like this in the library, no problem. We also have the You Wouldn't Want to Live in Pompeii. We really like these books. I think they're a lot of fun. They're super easy to read. You learn so much. The illustrations might throw you off. You might not take this book seriously, but actually it's a really informative book. I always find that we know so much by the time we're done. And the books, or the illustrations, kind of lend themselves to a more whimsical approach to the information. We also have Pompeii, and this book is a fantastic resource book. The last time we did this unit, I read this book aloud to my kids, and I found that it was a little bit too dense of a book to read aloud. So this time around, instead of reading the entire book cover to cover during this week, I may just do 1 paragraph for the page, or I may just read part of the book, or I may just read a little bit and then hand it over to my son. He can continue reading the sections that interest him. All right, so that was week 2. For week 3, we have 3 assigned reading books for my son. This is called The Ides of April, and this is a pretty fast, simple read. The last time we did this unit, I read this book aloud to my kids. This is a new book for this unit. It's called The Triumph for Flavius, and this is a super fast read. I mean, you know, you could read this aloud in no time. This is assigned reading for my son. I chose a really simple book to go along with this one because this one was a little bit thicker and I thought it would take him a little bit longer so that he would still be able to finish all 3 of them in the week. I also have Osborne's Romans, and this is like a really, really beautiful book that my son has been browsing through and reading from the start. This is the first book he picked up. And so while I might have otherwise read this in the past when I was doing this unit, I think this time around I'll just leave this available for him to browse through. It's one of those books that you just are drawn into. And then for this week, I also have Classical Kids. This is our first hands-on activity book. We really like the ones by Lori Carlson because they're super simple. It comes with a little bit of information about the project, like some historical information, and then the projects are super easy, and usually you can find a number of the materials just around your house already. So it's a really affordable way to go if you don't want to buy any pre-assembled kits with the material already included. This is a great way to go, and that way you can have your pick at any of these different projects. So really like this book. So that's where I've got this in like the 3rd week where we can spend a little more time doing our project. We may also do our Roman meal at this point since we would have already read the book on food and cooking in ancient Rome. So this is a good time to do a project at the middle of this unit so we can devote a little bit more time to some of these projects. Also, by placing it in the middle of the unit, it also gives you time to collect the materials that you need in order to do one of these projects. So that rounds out week 3. And at the same time, we're still going to be covering our history books, the read-alouds that we're doing in here, and we're also going to still be working through our curriculum at the same time. So this will be going through the entire 6 weeks. Something else that we're going to have for the entire 6 weeks is this audio book by Jim Weiss. It's William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and the Story of Rome. And since we're also listening to other audiobooks right now, this might be hard to kind of include, but still I've got it for this particular unit. I don't have a lot of audio for this unit, so this is the only one. And I just scheduled it for all 6 weeks. So this is week 4. I've got now just 2 books for my son to read. So you can see that it's getting more intense as the unit progresses. He had 5 books the first week, 3 books for week 2 and week 3, and now only 2 books for week 4. So we have the Aeneid for boys and girls, and he said that he could read this in a day or 2, and so I went ahead and I added children's Plutarch. This is the Tales of the Romans, and also this looks like it's going to be a pretty easy read. So again, 2 books for him to read during this week, along with these books that we'll be reading, and by this point in the unit we'll be able to know whether we're going to keep going with this one or whether we've added this one in and put this one aside. We also have Tools of the Ancient Romans, and the reason why I only have 1 book for this particular week is because, again, this is an activity book, so it's going to include some activities, so a little bit less reading in order for us to have more time to do some of our projects. And also there's a lot of reading involved in this book. And so if we wanted to go through and read some of these different chapters, this might even actually take more than 1 week. I think I have it scheduled for week 4 and for week 5, since it is quite a dense book as far as like there's 12 chapters in here and a ton of different activities. We may only choose 1 activity to do, but since some of them are pretty simple, we may be able to get to more. We also have this book that covers many different time periods in history, and so I just have the part on ancient Rome marked here. It's only a couple of pages. It has some nice artwork that we may use for some of our entries for our main lesson book. Wanted to show this one to you because this is a recent addition to our homeschool library. It has all these different ancient cultures, really great illustrations, and just a small bit of information about each of these cultures. What I like about this book is that it goes through so many different areas in the world, covers some cultures that you don't see a lot of resource materials for. And so having a book like this can inspire you to research these different ancient civilizations and get more resource materials to turn these into your own mini unit studies. All right, so on to week 5. We have a focus on like Roman soldiers and gladiators. And so we have You Wouldn't Want to Be a Roman Gladiator. So again, a really fun book to read. This would only take, you know, maybe a half an hour, 20 minutes to read. We also have Going to War in Roman Times. And this is another one that we can read aloud. It has tons of really great information. We got this book from the library bookstore. We also have Ancient Rome. And this is a really fun, really nicely illustrated book. We haven't read this one yet, but it seems like it's also somewhat of a story format, which will make it really fun and engaging for us to read aloud. And then the book that I have for my son to read for this week is The Lives of Famous Romans. And we only just have the one book this week because this one seemed a little bit more dense. So now the assigned reading that I have for him has shifted from historical fiction to just historical books. And so the previous week we had 2 books that were no longer historical fiction that were a little bit easier to read, and then this one gets a little bit denser. And so that's kind of my idea of kind of getting more intense with him as the unit goes on. All right, our last week actually has quite a bit of material. The book that I have for my son to read is called Hannibal, and again, I just have the one book for him. He also started out this unit with that more simple book on Hannibal, so this is a nice way to kind of open and close the whole unit. We also have this book on ancient science. This goes through multiple time periods, and so we'll just look for something on ancient Rome and do one of those projects. I saved it for the end because I'm not sure that we're actually going to get to this, but also I saved it for the end of the unit because the unit that follows this is going to be a science unit, and so it might be nice to kind of bridge these 2 units together by doing a science project at the end of this unit. We don't typically wait to do our mythologies till the end of the unit, but we did so much Roman, or rather Greek mythology with the previous 2 units, and the Greek mythology is really similar to the Roman mythology, so I decided not to devote any extra time to doing Roman mythology. Instead, I just have 2 resources that we can use at the end of this unit, and the first one is the story of King Midas and the Golden Touch. We also have this social studies activity book on Greek and Roman mythology. We used this the last time we did this unit, and it was kind of an okay resource. You read a section on a particular myth or something about mythology, and then there are some workbook pages in here. They're not here for me to show you since we actually used this book the last time we did this unit, but we're not really into workbooks a lot, and so this is the only workbook that I have for this entire unit, and we're not actually going to even use it as a workbook. We're actually just going to read the different sections. That's how we would actually use it, just as a resource material. But since we have already covered these mythologies in our previous 2 units, we're actually not going to cover it this time around. But if my son has extra time and he's interested, I have just scheduled that in for the 6th week of this unit so that he could have it. We also have 2 books on architecture, and this one's called City. And for this particular book, it's called Buildings. This goes through a lot of different time periods and different cultures, different historical areas. And so we just pulled, the ones that we want to do are on classical Greece and then into Rome and the Roman Empire. So we will just use these couple of sections. This will be something that I read aloud, and we may do an entry in our main lesson book as well. And then this one is called City, and the last time we did this unit, I read this book aloud to my kids, and it's a really easy, simple read, but this time around I probably won't read it aloud. I'll probably just have this available for my son, but it's possible that I may read it aloud if by this point in the unit he's just really done reading his books and he wants me to read this one aloud and we have time, then I'll definitely do that. So that rounds out the 6 weeks for this unit. The 2 resources that we'll be using throughout are The Story of the Romans and Ancient Rome. I may use this book as a resource guide for more information if I needed to put together a particular lesson that I felt I needed more information, but I don't think I'm going to use it. And this book, I really don't think we're going to get to. It just seems too dense, and at this point, with all of the other resources that we have, I don't think that I will be devoting any time to this book. The last thing I want to show you are the games that we are using for this unit. We have 10 Days in Europe. This is a geography game. We also have Africa and we also have Asia, and we chose these 3 because they each have land masses that were at one point occupied by the ancient Roman Empire, and it's a great way also just to familiarize ourselves with the geography of that area. This is modern geography, it's not ancient geography, but I think that it works just as well. And we'll just pull out one of those maps that we have so that we can get an idea of what those borders look like back then versus what they look like today. So we will use these during our opening activities along with mental math, which will include some math games or some movement math. And then we will also do these games as well as all of our other reading for this particular unit. There's one more thing that I want to show you that my son is working through. This is part of his daily math, and it's not his mental math or any of the math games, but it's the math that he just does on a daily basis. It doesn't take very long. It's really simple. It's repetitive. It's very straightforward. There isn't a lot of other math included. It's just the math that he's actually focused on and working on. He's nearly done with Key to Percents book 3, and then following that we're going to start on our geometry, which works really well because we also had a geometry main lesson block scheduled for this year. So just wanted to show you the 2 additional things that we were doing during this unit that don't relate to the unit but relate to how our other lessons are included within this unit, because this is a history unit, but we're still doing math on a daily basis. There's writing included in all of the lessons that we're doing. So we're just not doing science right now. We'll follow this unit with a science main lesson block, but we do have that ancient science book that we can incorporate into this unit. But the purpose of our main lesson blocks isn't to incorporate all the different subjects. It's just to have a period of time to focus on a particular subject area. Alright, so don't forget to check the description box below for those links that I mentioned earlier on in this video, especially if you want access to those free lesson plans. I've also left links to the different playlists that I mentioned. You can tap on the screen right now and check those different videos out. And don't forget that if you want to see what we are doing with our units on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.